After World War II, Germany was split into East and West, separated by the Berlin Wall. Whether you know that story or not, we'll take you through more details, mostly about how did the wall go down. It was on the 9th of November 1989, 5 days after 500,000 people gathered in East Berlin in a mass protest, that the Berlin Wall dividing Communist East Germany from West Germany crumbled. East German leaders had tried to calm mounting protests by loosening the borders, making travel easier for East Germans. They had not intended to open the border up completely. The changes were meant to be fairly minor, but the way they were delivered had major consequences. Notes about the new rules were handed to a spokesman, Gunter Schabowski, who had no time to read them before his regular press conference. When he read the note aloud for the first time, reporters were stunned. Private travel outside the country can now be applied for without prerequisites, he said. Surprised journalists clamored for more details. Shuffling through his notes, Mr. Schabowski said that as far as he was aware, it was effective immediately. In fact, it had been planned to start the next day, with details on applying for a visa. But the news was all over television, and East Germans flocked to the border in huge numbers. Mr. Jaeger frantically called his superiors, but they gave no orders either to open the gate, or to open fire to stop the crowd. With only a handful of guards facing hundreds of angry citizens, force would have been of little use. People could have been injured or killed even without shots being fired, in scuffles, or if there had been panic among the thousands gathered at the border crossing, he told Der Spiegel. That's why I gave my people the order, open the barrier. Thousands flowed through, celebrating and crying, in scenes beamed around the world. Many climbed the wall at Berlin's Brandenburg Gate, chipping away at the wall itself with hammers and pickaxes. A turbulent year had reached a climax. Let's know the reason for the fall of the wall. After World War II, Europe was carved up by the Soviet Union and its former Western allies, and the Soviets gradually erected an Iron Curtain, splitting the East from the West. Defeated Germany was divided up by the occupying powers, the US, UK, France and the USSR, with the eastern part occupied by the Soviets. East Germany, officially known as the German Democratic Republic, became the Soviet Union's foothold in Western Europe. But Berlin was split 4 ways, with British, French and American zones in the west of the city and a Soviet zone in the east. West Berlin became an island surrounded by Communist East Germany. The wall was eventually built in 1961 because East Berlin was hemorrhaging people to the west. By the 1980s, the Soviet Union faced acute economic problems and major food shortages, and when a nuclear reactor at the Chernobyl power station in Ukraine exploded in April 1986, it was a symbolic moment in the impending collapse of the communist bloc. Mikhail Gorbachev, the comparatively young Soviet leader who took power in 1985, introduced a reform policy of glasnost, openness, and perestroika, restructuring. But events moved far faster than he could have foreseen. What you need to know about the revolutionary wave. Reform movements were already stirring in the communist bloc. Years of activism and strikes in Poland culminated in its ruling Communist Party voting to legalize the banned Solidarity trade union. By February 1989, Solidarity was in talks with the government, and partially free elections in the summer saw it capture seats in parliament. Though the Communists retained a quota of seats, Solidarity swept the board wherever it was allowed to stand. Hungarians, too, launched mass demonstrations for democracy in March. In May, 150 miles, 240 kilometers, of barbed wire were dismantled along the border with Austria, the first chink in the Iron Curtain. Hungary's 1956 revolution was brutally suppressed by the Soviets, but this was succeeding. By August, the revolutionary wave had truly reignited on the fringes. 2 million people across Estonia, Latvia and Lithuania, then part of the Soviet Union, held one of the most memorable demonstrations of the so-called Singing Revolution when they formed a 370-mile, 600 kilometers, human chain across the Baltic republics calling for independence. In the heat of August, Hungary opened its borders to Austria in the west, allowing East German refugees an escape. The Iron Curtain was buckling. Czechoslovakia, whose push for liberalizing reform had been brutally suppressed in 1968, provided another means of escape. East Germans could travel to the neighboring socialist nation without restriction, and began to flood the West German embassy there by the hundreds, eventually being evacuated to the west by train. How about to know what the East Germany rebels did? It began with demonstrators rallying for freedom in the center of the city of Leipzig. On the 9th of October, within days of East Germany celebrating its 40th anniversary, 70,000 people took to the streets. There were calls for free elections from West Germany, and talk of reform from East Germany's new communist leader Egon Krenz. No one knew the fall of the wall was weeks away. In late October, Parliament in Hungary, which had been among the first to hold mass demonstrations, adopted legislation providing for direct presidential elections and multi-party parliamentary elections.